I never believed in fairy tales until I witnessed one unfold right before my eyes in the most unlikely place, the 42nd floor of Sterling Enterprises, where dreams go to die and hearts turn to stone. But sometimes, just sometimes, even the coldest winter gives way to spring. It all started on a Monday morning that felt like any other. The elevator hummed its familiar tune as I ascended to what everyone called the Arctic, the executive floor where Alexander Sterling ruled his empire with an iron fist and a heart that seemed carved from ice. I'd been working as his assistant for 3 years, long enough to know that smiles were currency he didn't accept, and warmth was a luxury he couldn't afford. Alexander Sterling. Even his name sounded like winter. Sharp, cutting, unforgiving. At 32, he'd built Sterling Enterprises from the ground up after his father's company collapsed in scandal. The media called him ruthless. His employees called him unreachable. I'd simply learned to call him sir and keep my distance. But that Monday morning, everything changed when she walked through those polished glass doors. Maya Chen arrived at exactly 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her scheduled interview, clutching a worn leather portfolio and wearing a smile so bright it could have powered the entire building. I watched from my desk as she approached the reception area, her heels clicking a cheerful rhythm against the marble floor that seemed to echo with hope. "Good morning," she chirped to Janet, our perpetually exhausted receptionist. "I'm Maya Chen, here for the marketing coordinator position with Mr. Sterling." Janet looked up from her computer screen with the expression of someone who'd seen a unicorn. No one, and I mean no one, walked into Sterling Enterprises looking that happy. It was like watching someone skip into a funeral parlor humming show tunes. "Mr. Sterling is..." Janet glanced toward the corner office where shadows seemed to gather even on sunny days. "Ready for you. Take the corridor to the right. Last door at the end." I felt a strange flutter in my stomach as Maya thanked Janet with genuine warmth and headed toward what we privately called the judgment chamber. In 3 years, I'd seen that office break spirits, crush dreams, and send grown executives fleeing with their dignity in tatters. Maya's smile didn't waver for a second. Through the glass walls, Alexander insisted on transparency in all things except his own emotions. I watched the interview unfold like a slow-motion car crash. Maya sat across from Alexander's imposing desk, her posture straight but relaxed, that impossible smile never leaving her face. Alexander's expression was stone, his steel-gray eyes scanning her resume with the intensity of a hawk studying prey. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language. Alexander leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his standard intimidation pose. Maya leaned forward slightly, gesturing with her hands as she spoke, completely unfazed by the sub-zero temperature of his stare. Then something unprecedented happened. Alexander's eyebrow twitched. Just a tiny movement, barely perceptible, but I'd been studying his micro-expressions for years. That twitch meant something had caught his attention, and not in a bad way. The interview lasted exactly 18 minutes, longer than most, which usually clocked in at a brutal 7 minutes before Alexander delivered his signature dismissal. "We'll be in touch." But Maya didn't emerge looking shell-shocked or defeated. If anything, her smile had grown brighter. "Have a wonderful day," she called out to Janet as she passed the reception desk. Then, catching my eye, she added. You too, as if she'd known me for years instead of having never spoken to me at all. I stared after her, wondering if I'd just witnessed a miracle or a masterclass in denial. No one walked out of Alexander Sterling's office looking happy. No one. No. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with an internal call. Miss Rodriguez? Alexander's voice was crisp, professional, giving nothing away. Send Maya Chen a job offer. Standard package. She starts Thursday. I nearly dropped the phone. In 3 years, Alexander had never hired anyone on the spot. His process typically involved weeks of deliberation, background checks that would make the FBI jealous, and at least 2 additional interviews with different department heads. Sir? I ventured, hoping I'd misheard. You heard me correctly. Thursday, 8:30 sharp. There was a pause, then something I'd never heard in his voice before, uncertainty. And Miss Rodriguez? Assign her the desk near the east windows, the one with the good lighting. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone in bewilderment. Alexander Sterling caring about lighting was like expecting snow in July. And yet, here we were, 3 days away from what I was beginning to suspect would be the beginning of the end of everything we thought we knew about our untouchable CEO. Thursday morning arrived with Maya Chen, punctual as promised, carrying the same worn leather portfolio and radiating enough enthusiasm to power a small city. She wore a navy blue dress that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes, and her long black hair was pulled back in a professional bun that somehow still managed to look effortlessly elegant. Good morning, everyone, she announced to the entire floor as she stepped off the elevator. The usual morning symphony of keyboard clicks and phone conversations actually paused. People looked up from their screens with expressions ranging from confusion to mild terror. We didn't do good morning, everyone, at Sterling Enterprises. We did silent nods, muttered acknowledgments, and the occasional grunt of recognition. Actual cheerfulness was like speaking a foreign language no one remembered how to understand. I stood to greet her, smoothing down my black pencil skirt and checking my watch. Miss Chen, welcome to Sterling Enterprises. I'm Elena Rodriguez, Mr. Sterling's executive assistant. I'll be showing you to your desk and helping you get oriented. Maya, please, she said, extending her hand with genuine warmth. And thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Excited to be here at Sterling Enterprises, where excitement came to die and optimism was systematically crushed under the weight of quarterly reports and impossible deadlines. I led her across the open floor plan toward the east side of the building, acutely aware that every eye in the office was tracking our progress. Maya's heels clicked that same cheerful rhythm, and she actually hummed softly under her breath, some upbeat melody that seemed to bounce off the gray walls and make them look a little less imposing. This is your workspace, I said, gesturing to the desk Alexander had specifically requested. It was, admittedly, one of the better spots on the floor, positioned to catch the morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, with a clear view of the city skyline and, more importantly, a direct sightline to Alexander's corner office. Oh, this is perfect, Maya exclaimed, setting down her portfolio and immediately spinning the chair to test its height. Look at that view! I can see all the way to the harbor from here. How lucky am I? Lucky. She thought she was lucky to work here. I made a mental note to schedule her a psychological evaluation. Your computer login information is here, I continued, handing her a manila folder. Your direct supervisor is Jennifer Walsh in marketing, but Mr. Sterling has requested that all your reports also be copied to him directly. Maya's eyes lit up with what I could only describe as delight. Mr. Sterling wants to see my work personally? That's wonderful. I'd love to get his feedback. He seems like such an insightful person. I blinked, wondering if we were talking about the same Alexander Sterling. Insightful? Yes. Wonderful? That was a stretch that would challenge Olympic gymnasts. He's particular about quality, I said diplomatically. I can tell. The questions he asked during my interview were brilliant. Really made me think about marketing strategy in ways I hadn't considered before. I actually stayed up until 2 a.m. the night after our meeting, researching some of the points he raised. This was getting surreal. Alexander Sterling inspiring someone to lose sleep over marketing theory? The same man who once made a department head cry by pointing out a misplaced comma in a presentation. Well, I said, struggling to maintain my professional composure, I'm sure you'll fit right in. Coffee is available in the break room. Lunch is typically between noon and 1. And if you need anything at all, my desk is right over there. I pointed toward the reception area where I'd stationed myself strategically to field all requests before they reached Alexander's radar. Thank you so much, Elena. Really. Everyone here seems so professional and dedicated. I can already tell this is going to be an amazing experience. I left Maya settling into her new workspace, humming that same cheerful melody as she arranged her few personal items on the desk. A small potted succulent. Somehow she'd managed to smuggle life into Sterling Enterprises. A framed photo of what looked like her parents and younger brother, all sharing the same bright smile that seemed to be Maya's default expression. And a coffee mug with "Choose Joy" written in cheerful yellow script. Choose joy, in a place where joy came to die. I returned to my desk with a growing sense of unease, like watching someone walk cheerfully toward a cliff edge. Maya Chen was about to discover what everyone learned eventually. Sterling Enterprises wasn't a place for dreamers. And Alexander Sterling wasn't a man who appreciated sunshine when he'd built his empire in shadows. The first sign that something was different came at exactly 10:15 a.m. Alexander emerged from his office for his usual morning reconnaissance, a brisk walk through the floor to ensure everyone was properly miserable and productive. His route never varied. Straight line from his door to the elevator, eyes forward. No acknowledgement of the staff who flattened themselves against cubicle walls like he was emitting radiation. But this morning, his steady stride faltered for just a moment as he passed Maya's desk. She looked up from her computer screen with that radiant smile. Good morning, Mr. Sterling. Thank you again for this opportunity. I'm already learning so much, so... Alexander stopped. Actually, stopped. For 3 years, I'd watched him bulldoze through the office like a force of nature, never breaking pace for anything or anyone. But Maya's greeting brought him to a complete halt. Miss Chen. His voice was carefully controlled, but I caught something underneath. Surprise, maybe? You're settling in well. Very well, thank you. This desk has the most incredible view. I was just watching the sunrise reflect off the harbor. It's almost like having art right outside the window. Alexander's gaze shifted toward the windows, following her line of sight. For a moment, just a moment, his expression softened. The hard lines around his eyes relaxed, and something that might have been wonder flickered across his features. Then the mask snapped back into place.
"The view is adequate," he said curtly. "I trust you'll find the work more engaging than the scenery."
Oh, absolutely. I've already reviewed the Q3 campaign reports. And I have some ideas for optimization that I'd love to discuss with you sometime. The demographic analysis from last quarter shows some fascinating trends that I think we could leverage for. Submit your recommendations through proper channels. Alexander cut her off, but his tone lacked its usual Arctic bite. Miss Walsh will review them first. Of course. Maya's smile never dimmed. I just thought, since you mentioned during my interview how important it is to look at marketing from multiple analytical angles, you might be interested in a fresh perspective on the data patterns I noticed. Something extraordinary happened then. Alexander's eyes widened, just slightly, but enough for me to notice from my vantage point 20 feet away. Maya had just quoted something from their interview, word for word by the sound of it, and it had clearly made an impact. Yes. Multiple angles are important. He seemed to be struggling with words, like a computer trying to process an unexpected input. Perhaps. After Miss Walsh's review. Wonderful. I'll make sure to include detailed supporting data. Oh, and Mr. Sterling? She reached for something on her desk, the coffee mug. I brought an extra tea from the coffee shop downstairs. Chamomile with honey. I noticed you seemed a bit tired during our interview, and I thought, well, I hope you don't mind. I left it on your desk this morning. The silence that followed was deafening. The entire floor seemed to hold its breath. No one, absolutely no one, brought Alexander Sterling tea. He had specific preferences, a particular schedule, and an unwritten rule that his space was sacred territory. I waited for the explosion, the cold dismissal, the withering stare that could freeze blood in veins. Instead, Alexander Sterling said, "Thank you." 2 words. Quiet, almost gentle. Then he turned and walked back to his office, his usual commanding stride replaced by something that looked almost uncertain. Through the glass walls, I watched him approach his desk where, sure enough, a simple paper cup sat next to his morning report. He stared at it for a long moment, then carefully lifted it to his lips. His eyes closed as he tasted it, and for just an instant, his shoulders relaxed. Maya had been watching too. When Alexander looked up and caught her eye through the glass, she gave him a small wave and another one of those impossible smiles. He didn't wave back, but he also didn't look away immediately. For several seconds, they maintained eye contact across the office space, and I swear I could feel something shifting in the air around us. Then Alexander's phone rang, shattering the moment. He answered with his usual brusque efficiency, and the spell was broken. But something had changed. I could feel it in the way the morning light seemed brighter, in the way the usual office tension had eased just a fraction. Maya Chen had been in the building for exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes, and she'd already accomplished something I would have thought impossible. She'd made Alexander Sterling say thank you. The rest of the morning proceeded with what passed for normalcy at Sterling Enterprises, except for the small fact that Alexander's office door remained open. Not wide open, that would have been apocalyptic, but cracked enough to let light spill out into the corridor. In 3 years, that door had never been anything but firmly closed. Maya threw herself into her work with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything else. I watched her reviewing files, making notes in neat handwriting, and occasionally glancing toward Alexander's office with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not starstruck. She seemed too grounded for that. More like curious, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle. At 11:30, Jennifer Walsh arrived to officially welcome Maya to the marketing team. Jennifer was a competent manager in her 40s who'd learned to navigate Sterling Enterprises by keeping her head down and her expectations low. She approached Maya's desk with the wary expression of someone about to explain the rules of survival in hostile territory. Maya, I'm Jennifer Walsh, Marketing Director. Welcome to the team.
Jennifer, so nice to finally meet you in person. Thank you for all those helpful emails about the orientation materials.
Of course. I thought we could grab coffee and go over your initial assignments, get you up to speed on our current campaigns.
That sounds perfect.
Should I bring my notes from this morning's research?
Jennifer blinked. Research? It's your first day.
I know, but I wanted to get a head start. I spent some time this morning analyzing our Q3 performance metrics, and I found some interesting correlation patterns between demographic engagement and seasonal buying trends that might inform our Q4 strategy. I watched Jennifer's expression cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been hope. You analyzed metrics on your first day?
Well, I like to dive right in. Plus, the data is fascinating. Did you know that our 25-34 demographic shows a 23% higher engagement rate
With video content during weekday mornings versus weekends? But the 35-44 group is exactly the opposite. I think there might be some opportunity there for targeted scheduling. Jennifer glanced toward Alexander's office, then back at Maya. That's very thorough of you. Yes, let's definitely discuss this over coffee. As they headed toward the elevator, I heard Jennifer murmur, 23%, you said? 23.7, actually, but I rounded down for simplicity. Oh. The elevator doors closed on Jennifer's stunned expression, and I found myself smiling despite everything. Maya Chen was either going to revolutionize Sterling Enterprises or get herself fired within a week. Possibly both. The afternoon brought the usual parade of meetings, phone calls, and minor crises that kept Sterling Enterprises functioning. I managed Alexander's schedule with practiced efficiency, fielding calls from investors, rescheduling appointments, and ensuring that his carefully orchestrated day ran without interruption. But I couldn't help noticing the small changes. The way he glanced toward Maya's desk when he thought no one was looking. How he seemed to linger by his window, positioned to catch glimpses of the east side of the floor. The fact that the empty teacup remained on his desk, pushed slightly to one side but not thrown away. At 2:30, Maya returned from her extended coffee meeting with Jennifer, practically glowing with excitement. She settled back at her desk and immediately opened her laptop. fingers flying across the keyboard with the intensity of someone who'd just discovered fire.
20 minutes later, my phone buzzed.
Miss Rodriguez. Alexander's voice was carefully neutral. Is Miss Chen at her desk? I glanced over at Maya, who was completely absorbed in whatever she was working on, occasionally pausing to scribble notes on a legal pad. Yes, sir.
And Miss Walsh?
Still in meetings, I believe. Would you like me to check her calendar?
There was a pause. No. That's not necessary.
Another pause, longer this time.
Miss Rodriguez, in your experience, how long does it typically take new employees to adapt to our work environment? I blinked, completely thrown by the question. Alexander Sterling asking for my opinion on anything was unprecedented. Asking about employee adaptation was beyond unprecedented. It was entering uncharted territory.
Well, I said carefully, most people need a few weeks to adjust to our particular culture and expectations.
And those who don't adapt?
They usually don't last long. I kept my voice diplomatic, but we both knew the statistics. Sterling Enterprises had a turnover rate that would make other companies weep.
I see. Another pause. Miss Chen seems to be integrating well.
Yeah, sir. Very well. Good. That's good.
The line went quiet, but I could hear him breathing, as if he wanted to say something else but couldn't find the words.
Sir, was there anything else?
No, that's all.
But he didn't hang up immediately. And in that moment of silence, I heard something I'd never heard before in Alexander Sterling's voice. Uncertainty. As if he were navigating unfamiliar territory without a map. Finally, the line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone and wondering what exactly I'd just witnessed. At 4:15, Maya stood up from her desk and walked purposefully toward the elevator. She carried a folder in one hand and that yellow coffee mug in the other, and she moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. 5 minutes later, she returned, without the folder but still carrying the mug, now steaming with what smelled like fresh tea. She set it on her desk and resumed working, humming that same cheerful melody under her breath. I was about to dismiss it as another coffee run when my phone buzzed again.
Miss Rodriguez, did Miss Chen just...
Alexander's voice trailed off. Just what, sir?
Did she just bring me another tea?
I looked over at Maya's desk, where the empty folder lay next to her computer. It appears so, sir.
She brought me tea, twice in one day.
Yes, sir.
Why would she do that? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with a bewilderment that would have been comical if it weren't so genuine. Alexander Sterling, master of the corporate universe, was completely baffled by a simple act of kindness. Perhaps, I ventured, she's just being thoughtful. Thoughtful. He repeated the word like it was in a foreign language. Thoughtful. Some people are naturally considerate, Sir Yashinska. But why me? Why would she be
considerate to me. The vulnerability in his voice caught me completely off guard. For just a moment, the mask had slipped entirely, revealing something raw and confused underneath. Alexander Sterling, the man who could negotiate million-dollar deals without blinking, was genuinely puzzled by basic human kindness.
I don't know, sir, I said softly. You'd have to ask her.
Ask her. Another pause. Yes. I suppose I could ask her.
But he didn't hang up, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head.
Miss Rodriguez.
Yes, sir? In your opinion, is it appropriate for supervisors to engage in casual conversation with new employees?
I nearly dropped the phone. Alexander Sterling was asking for advice on office social interaction. The man who once fired someone for saying good morning too enthusiastically was wondering about casual conversation.
Well, I said, choosing my words carefully. Many managers find that getting to know their team members helps improve productivity and morale. Productivity and morale. He was clearly filing this information away for future reference. And such conversations would be normal?
Very normal, sir.
I see. Thank you, Miss Rodriguez.
This time he did hang up, but not before I caught what sounded suspiciously like a shaky exhale. I spent the next hour watching the most fascinating corporate theater I'd ever witnessed. Alexander emerged from his office 3 separate times, each time walking with apparent purpose toward the elevator or conference rooms. But each path took him past Maya's desk, and each time, he slowed just slightly as he approached. Maya looked up during each pass, offering that brilliant smile and a cheerful, "Hi, Mr. Sterling," that seemed to momentarily freeze him in place. He'd nod stiffly and continue on his way. But I noticed that his return trips took progressively longer, as if he were trying to work up the courage for something. On the 4th pass, Maya was standing at her desk, stretching after what had clearly been an intense work session. She'd rolled up the sleeves of her dress and loosened her hair from its professional bun, letting it fall in soft waves around her shoulders. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair, and for a moment, she looked less like a corporate employee and more like someone you might encounter in a coffee shop or bookstore, approachable, real, human. Alexander stopped dead in his tracks. "Mr. Sterling?" Maya noticed him standing there, a concerned expression crossing her features. "Are you all right? You look a bit pale." He cleared his throat, seeming to remember where he was. "I'm fine. Just... The quarterly reports are particularly challenging this period."
Oh, I can imagine. I was just looking at some of the preliminary data for next quarter's projections. Would you like me to prepare a summary analysis? I know you're incredibly busy, and I'd be happy to help lighten the load. Something extraordinary happened then. Alexander Sterling smiled. Not the tight, professional expression he wore for board meetings or investor calls, but a genuine, surprised smile that transformed his entire face. The harsh lines softened, his gray eyes warmed, and for just a moment, he looked like a completely different person, younger, more approachable, almost vulnerable.
"You would do that?" he asked, as if the concept of someone volunteering to help was completely foreign to him.
Of course. That's what teamwork is all about, right? Plus, I really enjoy data analysis. There's something satisfying about finding patterns and trends that others might miss.
"Patterns and trends," he repeated, and I could see his analytical mind engaging with the concept. "What kind of patterns have you identified so far?"
Maya's face lit up with excitement, and she gestured toward her computer screen. "Well, if you have a few minutes, I could show you what I've found."
The correlation between social media engagement and direct sales is particularly interesting, especially when you factor in demographic clustering and seasonal variables. I watched, transfixed, as Alexander Sterling, the man who scheduled bathroom breaks and timed his lunch to the minute, glanced at his watch and then said, "I have a few minutes. Maya practically glowed with happiness as she pulled up her analysis on screen. Alexander moved to stand beside her desk, close enough to see the monitor, and suddenly the air around them seemed charged with a different kind of energy. "See this spike here in September?" Maya pointed to a graph, her finger tracing the upward trend. "At first, I thought it was just back-to-school shopping behavior, but when I dug deeper, I found that it's actually correlated with our video content featuring real customer testimonials. People trust authentic stories, especially during transitional periods in their lives." Alexander leaned closer, studying the data with the intense focus I'd seen him apply to merger documents and acquisition proposals. But there was something different about his concentration now, less predatory, more genuinely curious. "And this dip in November?" he asked, pointing to another section of the graph. "That's where it gets interesting. Everyone assumes holiday shopping would drive engagement up, but our data shows that consumers actually disengage from marketing content when they're overwhelmed with choices. However, look what happens when we filter for mobile versus desktop interaction." Maya pulled up another screen, her enthusiasm infectious as she explained the nuances of consumer behavior patterns. Alexander listened with an attention that seemed to surprise even him, asking questions that showed he was not just hearing her words but genuinely processing her insights. "This is remarkable analysis," he said finally, straightening up but not moving away from her desk. "How long did it take you to compile this?" "Oh, just this afternoon. I know I should probably focus on my assigned tasks first, but I find this kind of research so fascinating that time just flies by and—" "Just this afternoon." Alexander's voice carried a note of amazement. "Miss Chen, this level of analysis typically takes our team weeks to complete." Maya blushed, a soft pink tinge that made her look even younger. "I've always been good with numbers. My mother used to joke that I could find patterns in alphabet soup." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman, She is. She's actually the one who encouraged me to apply here. She said Sterling Enterprises was the kind of company where smart, hardworking people could really make a difference. Something shifted in Alexander's expression at those words. The warmth in his eyes deepened, but it was tinged with something that looked almost like pain. "Your mother. She believes in making a difference?" "Absolutely. She taught me that work should be more than just a paycheck. It should be about contributing something meaningful to the world. She always said that if you can't find joy in what you do, you haven't found the right place to do it yet."
Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the data visualization still glowing on Maya's screen. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it.
And have you found the right place?
Maya looked up at him with those warm brown eyes, completely unguarded in her response. I think I might have. It's only been one day, but there's something special about this place. About the potential here. About... She paused, seeming to catch herself before finishing the thought.
About? Alexander prompted, and there was something almost desperate in the way he asked it, as if her answer might hold the key to something he'd been searching for without knowing it.
Maya's cheeks flushed again, but she met his gaze directly. About the people. There's so much passion here, even if it's sometimes hidden under layers of professionalism. I can see it in the way everyone approaches their work, in the standards you've set, in the attention to detail that goes into everything. It's like a symphony where everyone's too afraid to play their part loudly enough for the music to really soar.
Alexander stared at her, and I could see something fundamental shifting behind his eyes. The careful control he maintained over his expression was slipping, revealing glimpses of someone who might have once believed in symphonies and soaring music before the world taught him that silence was safer.
A symphony, he murmured, as if testing the word. I've never thought of it that way.
Maybe that's because you've been conducting so hard that you forgot to listen to the music, Maya said gently, and the simple wisdom of her words seemed to hit Alexander like a physical blow. He took a step back, the mask sliding back into place as if he'd suddenly remembered where he was and who he was supposed to be. I have calls to return.
Of course, Maya said quickly, clearly sensing the change in atmosphere. Thank you for taking the time to look at my analysis. I know how valuable your time is.
It was illuminating, Alexander said stiffly, but his eyes lingered on her face as if he were trying to memorize something. Continue with this level of work, Miss Chen. It's exceptional. He turned and walked back toward his office, his stride once again controlled and purposeful. But I noticed that he paused at his door, glancing back toward Maya's desk where she was already diving back into her work with renewed energy. The rest of the day passed quietly, but there was an electricity in the air that hadn't been there before. Maya worked with focused intensity, occasionally glancing toward Alexander's office where the lights burned late into the evening. Alexander himself remained largely invisible behind his glass walls, but I caught glimpses of him at his window, looking out toward the harbor where the sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. At 6:30, most of the staff had gone home, leaving only the usual skeleton crew of workaholics and overachievers. Maya was still at her desk, completely absorbed in something on her computer screen, when Alexander's office door opened. Miss Chen? She looked up, startled to find him standing in the doorway of his office. Mr. Sterling, I didn't realize you were still here. I could say the same about you. It's well past normal business hours.
Maya glanced at her watch and looked genuinely surprised. Oh, wow. I had no idea it was so late. I guess I just got caught up in this fascinating trend analysis. Did you know that customer retention rates increase by 34%
when they receive personalized follow-up communications within 48 hours of purchase. But the communication style has to match their initial engagement preference, or the effect completely disappears.
Alexander moved closer, drawn in spite of himself by her enthusiasm. Personalized how?
Well, that's the really interesting part. It's not about using their name or referencing their specific purchase. Everyone does that now.
It's about matching the emotional tone of their original interaction. If someone made an impulsive, excitement-driven purchase, they respond to follow-ups that maintain that energy. But if they made a careful, researched decision, they want follow-ups that acknowledge their thoughtfulness and provide additional value.
Emotional tone, Alexander repeated. And I could see him filing this concept away with the same intensity he'd once reserved for market analysis and profit margins.
Exactly. People want to feel understood, not just categorized. It's the difference between genuine connection and algorithmic interaction. Alexander was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on Maya's face with an intensity that made me wonder if they were still talking about marketing data.
Miss Chen, he said finally, would you be interested in presenting this analysis to the senior leadership team? Your insights could significantly impact our Q4 strategy.
Maya's eyes widened with excitement and what looked like genuine surprise. Really? You think it's good enough for senior leadership? I think, Alexander said carefully, that you have a perspective we've been missing, a way of seeing patterns that goes beyond simple data analysis. I would love that. When were you thinking? Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., conference room B. I'll send the agenda details to your email. Thank you so much, Mr. Sterling. Really, this opportunity means everything to me. Alexander nodded, but he didn't immediately turn to leave. Instead, he stood there for a moment, seeming to struggle with something internal. Miss Chen, he said finally. Yes?
The tea today. Both times. Why did you?
He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with the question but unable to let it go. Maya's expression softened, and she tilted her head slightly as she considered her answer. You look tired, she said simply. And a little sad, if you don't mind me saying so. My grandmother always said that tea was like a hug in a cup. Sometimes people need that comfort even if they don't know how to ask for it. Alexander stared at her, and in the silence that followed, I could hear something breaking, or maybe something healing. His carefully constructed armor seemed to crack just a little, letting through a glimmer of the person he might have been before life taught him that hugs were weaknesses and comfort was a luxury he couldn't afford. Your grandmother sounds like a remarkable woman, he said quietly. She always saw the best in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. And you inherited that gift? Maya smiled, but it was different from her usual bright expression, gentler, more knowing. I inherited the belief that everyone deserves kindness, even the people who think they don't need it, especially those people. Alexander's breath caught, and for a moment, I thought he might say something profound, something that would crack his facade wide open. Instead, he simply nodded and said, "Good night, Miss Chen."
Good night, Mr. Sterling. Thank you again for this opportunity.
I watched him walk back to his office, but instead of closing the door behind him, he left it open, wide open this time, letting the light spill out into the darkening workspace. Maya gathered her things with a contentment that seemed to radiate outward, humming that same cheerful melody as she prepared to leave. As she waited for the elevator, she turned back toward the office one last time, her gaze finding Alexander's windows where his silhouette was visible against the city lights. She raised her hand in a small wave, and after a moment's hesitation, I saw Alexander lift his hand in response. The elevator doors closed on Maya's smile, and I was left alone with the profound sense that I'd just witnessed the first day of something extraordinary, the beginning of a transformation that would change everything we thought we knew about the untouchable Alexander Sterling. But I had no idea just how deep that transformation would go, or how much it would cost them both. The next morning arrived with an energy I'd never felt before at Sterling Enterprises. Word had somehow spread about Maya's impromptu presentation to senior leadership, and there was a buzz of curiosity running through the office like an electrical current. New employees rarely got face time with the executive team, and never within their first week. Maya arrived at 7:45 a.m., carrying her worn leather portfolio and wearing a charcoal gray dress that struck the perfect balance between professional and approachable. Her hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, but a few soft strands had escaped to frame her face, giving her an effortlessly elegant look that somehow managed to brighten the sterile corporate environment. "Good morning, Elena," she called out as she passed my desk, her voice carrying its usual warmth despite what had to be pre-presentation nerves. "Good morning, Maya. How are you feeling about this morning?" She paused, setting down her portfolio to give me her full attention. Honestly, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. It's like standing at the edge of a diving board, knowing the water's going to be cold, but trusting that the jump will be worth it. "You'll do wonderfully," I assured her, and I genuinely meant it. "Your analysis yesterday was impressive even by our standards here." "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. I can tell you're someone Mr. Sterling trusts completely." Before I could respond to that surprisingly perceptive observation, the elevator chimed, and Alexander emerged with his usual purposeful stride. But there was something different about him this morning, a subtle energy that seemed to vibrate just beneath his controlled exterior. His eyes found Maya immediately, and the professional nod he gave her was accompanied by something that might have been a smile. Not the tight, corporate expression I was used to, but something softer, more genuine. "Miss Chen, ready for this morning's presentation?" "Yes, sir. I've prepared additional supporting data and some implementation recommendations that I think might be useful." "Implementation recommendations." Alexander's eyebrow raised slightly, not in skepticism, but in what looked like impressed surprise. "You've thought beyond the analysis itself." "Well, identifying patterns is only valuable if you can translate them into actionable strategies. I hope I haven't overstepped by preparing suggestions."
Not at all. Initiative is... He paused, as if searching for the right word. Refreshing.
As they spoke, I noticed the subtle changes in Alexander's posture. His shoulders were less rigid, his hands unclenched at his sides.
The conversation flowed with an ease that seemed to surprise him as much as it did me.
Mr. Sterling? Maya's voice carried a note of concern. Are you all right? You seem a bit different this morning. Alexander's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't realized how transparent he'd become. Different how?
She searched for a diplomatic way to phrase it. Burdened, I suppose. Like you actually got some sleep for once.
The observation was so astute and delivered with such gentle care that Alexander actually smiled, a real, unguarded expression that transformed his entire face.
I did. Actually, for the first time in quite a while.
That's wonderful. Good sleep makes everything clearer, doesn't it? Problems that seem insurmountable at midnight often have obvious solutions by morning. Yes, Alexander said quietly, his gaze fixed on her face with an intensity that made the air around them seem charged. Solutions that were there all along, just overlooked. Bull.
They stood there for a moment, caught in a bubble of understanding that seemed to exclude the rest of the world. Then Alexander's phone buzzed, breaking the spell and reminding them both where they were.
The senior team will be gathering in 10 minutes, he said, his professional mask sliding back into place but not quite fitting as tightly as before. Shall we?
Let's do this, Maya said, squaring her shoulders with determination. I watched them walk toward the conference room together, noting how Alexander's stride had adjusted to match her pace, how he gestured for her to precede him through the doorway with an old-fashioned courtesy that seemed as natural as breathing. Whatever was happening between them was subtle but unmistakable, a connection that was growing stronger with each interaction. Conference Room B was Sterling Enterprises' showcase space, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive mahogany table that could seat 20, and enough advanced presentation technology to run a small country. This morning, it hosted 8 of the company's most senior executives, all of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else than listening to a new hire's theories about customer engagement. I positioned myself at my usual spot just outside the room, close enough to provide support if needed, but far enough away to avoid interfering with the proceedings. Through the glass walls, I could see Maya setting up her presentation with calm efficiency while Alexander introduced her to the team.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Maya Chen, our new marketing coordinator. Ms. Chen has prepared an analysis that I believe will significantly impact our Q4 strategy. The introduction was standard Alexander Sterling, direct, professional, giving nothing away. But I caught the slight emphasis on, I believe, and I knew the senior team had caught it too. Alexander Sterling didn't endorse anything lightly.
Victoria Hammond, the VP of Sales, leaned back in her chair with the expression of someone preparing to be thoroughly unimpressed. We're eager to hear what fresh perspectives you can offer, Miss Chen.
The tone was polite but dismissive, the kind of corporate speak that translated to, let's get this over with so we can move on to real business. But Maya either didn't catch the subtext or chose to ignore it entirely.
Thank you all for this opportunity, she began, her voice clear and confident despite the intimidating audience. I know your time is incredibly valuable, so I'll be as concise as possible while still covering the key insights I've discovered. She clicked to her first slide, a clean,
elegant visualization of customer engagement data that immediately commanded attention. Over the past quarter, we've seen consistent patterns in customer behavior that suggest we're missing significant opportunities for deeper engagement and increased retention. David Morrison, the CFO, glanced at his watch with barely concealed impatience. "Miss Chen, we track engagement metrics quite closely. I'm not sure what new insights a coordinator-level analysis could provide." It was a direct challenge, delivered with the casual cruelty that passed for normal discourse in corporate boardrooms. I watched Maya's face, expecting to see doubt or intimidation creep into her expression. Instead, she smiled. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Morrison. Sterling Enterprises has excellent tracking systems in place. But sometimes when you're standing too close to a painting, you miss the broader composition." She clicked to the next slide, revealing a complex but beautifully organized correlation matrix. "What I've found isn't new data. It's a new way of interpreting the data you already have." The room fell silent as the executives studied the visualization. Even from my position outside the conference room, I could see that Maya had their attention now. The patterns she'd identified were clear, compelling, and previously invisible. "This is remarkable," murmured Jennifer Walsh, who'd been quietly supportive but clearly hadn't expected this level of sophistication from her new team member. "The correlation coefficients are statistically significant across multiple variables," Maya continued, warming to her subject. "But the real breakthrough came when I started mapping emotional engagement patterns against purchasing behavior." She clicked through several more slides, each one building on the previous insights with mathematical precision and intuitive clarity. The executives leaned forward, their initial skepticism replaced by genuine interest. Alexander watched from the head of the table, his expression carefully neutral, but I could see the pride in his eyes as Maya commanded the room with growing confidence. She wasn't just presenting data, she was telling a story, weaving together numbers and human psychology in a way that made complex concepts feel accessible and actionable. "The implementation strategy I'm proposing," Maya said, advancing to her final slides, "would require minimal additional resources, but could increase customer lifetime value by an estimated 28%, while reducing churn by approximately 15%. Victoria Hammond straightened in her chair. 28%? That seems optimistic. I understand the skepticism, Maya replied calmly. But the modeling is based on conservative estimates using existing customer segments. The actual impact could be significantly higher if we optimize for the emotional engagement factors I've identified. "Show me the numbers," David Morrison said, his previous dismissiveness replaced by sharp focus. Maya had anticipated the request. "I've prepared detailed financial projections for each scenario, including risk assessments and implementation timelines. The initial investment would pay for itself within the first quarter, with cumulative benefits extending well into next year." She walked them through the numbers with the fluency of someone who'd lived and breathed financial modeling, but maintained the human perspective that kept the analysis from becoming purely academic. By the time she finished, the room was buzzing with energy. "Miss Chen," Victoria said, her tone completely transformed from the beginning of the meeting, "this is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need to stay competitive. How quickly could we begin implementing these strategies?" "Some elements could launch within 2 weeks," Maya replied. "Others would require more extensive coordination,
but I've outlined a phased approach that minimizes disruption while maximizing early wins. Alexander spoke for the first time since his introduction. What would you need from a resource perspective? Primarily collaboration with the existing teams. The beauty of this approach is that it leverages our current capabilities while optimizing for efficiency. I'd be happy to work with each department to customize implementation for their specific needs.
The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with Maya fielding questions with remarkable poise and demonstrating a depth of understanding that impressed even the most senior executives. When it finally concluded, the energy in the room was electric with possibility.
Miss Chen, Alexander said as the team filed out, could you stay for a moment?
Of course.
I watched through the glass as the conference room emptied, leaving just Maya and Alexander alone with the remnants of what had clearly been a triumph. Alexander stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city skyline, while Maya quietly packed up her presentation materials.
That was... Alexander began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words.
Was it all right? Maya asked, genuine concern in her voice. I know it was a lot of information to process at once. Alexander turned to face her, and even from my position outside the room, I could see the transformation in his expression. The mask had slipped entirely, revealing something raw and wondering underneath. All right? He moved closer to her, his voice dropping to a tone I'd never heard before, warm, almost intimate. Maya, that was extraordinary. I've been in business for over a decade, and I've never seen a presentation that combined analytical rigor with such genuine insight into human nature. Maya's cheeks flushed with pleasure at the praise, but there was something else in her expression, a soft vulnerability that suggested his opinion mattered to her more than it probably should have. Thank you, she said quietly. That means everything coming from you. I can tell how much you care about this company, about doing things right. I just want to contribute something worthwhile. Worthwhile. Alexander repeated the word as if it held special significance. Maya, what you presented today isn't just worthwhile, it's revolutionary. You've identified patterns that could fundamentally change how we approach customer relationships. They stood facing each other in the empty conference room, surrounded by the detritus of corporate success, empty coffee cups, scattered notepads, the lingering energy of a meeting that had exceeded everyone's expectations. But the space between them felt charged with something that had nothing to do with quarterly projections or market analysis. Mr. Sterling, Maya said hesitantly, can I ask you something? Alexander, he said suddenly, the word seeming to surprise him as much as it did her. When it's just us, you can call me Alexander. Maya's smile was like sunrise, slow, warm, transformative. Alexander, can I ask why you took a chance on me? I know my resume doesn't exactly scream senior leadership material, and your reputation for selective hiring is well established. Oh. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face as if looking for something he'd lost and never expected to find again. During your interview, he said finally, you talked about finding joy in unexpected places, about seeing potential where others see only problems. I realized I hadn't thought about joy in years, decades, maybe
I hired you because I wanted to remember what that felt like.
The honesty in his voice was devastating in its simplicity. Maya's eyes softened with understanding, and when she spoke, her words carried the gentle wisdom that seemed to be her defining characteristics.
Joy isn't something you find, Alexander. It's something you choose, every day, even when the world gives you 1,000 reasons not to. Especially then. Alexander stared at her, and I could see something fundamental shifting in his expression. Walls crumbling, defenses falling away. Years of careful control unraveling in the face of her simple truth.
I don't know how to do that anymore, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to know how, Maya said gently, taking a step closer to him. You just have to be willing to try. And something tells me you're braver than you think you are.
They stood there in the golden afternoon light streaming through the conference room windows, two people discovering something neither had expected to find. The air between them hummed with possibility, with the fragile hope of connection in a world that had taught them both to expect disappointment.
Then Alexander's phone rang, shattering the moment with its shrill urgency. He glanced at the screen and sighed, the spell broken but not entirely dispelled.
I have to take this, he said regretfully. But Maya, thank you. For today, for the presentation, for...
He gestured helplessly, unable to articulate the magnitude of what she'd given him.
Thank you for listening,
she replied, and the simple grace of her response seemed to undo him completely. I watched Alexander take his call while Maya gathered her materials, both of them moving with the careful attention of people trying not to break something precious and newly formed. When Maya finally left the conference room, she walked past my desk with a dreamy expression that suggested she was as affected by their conversation as Alexander had been.
How did it go?
I asked, though the answer was written all over her face.
It went. She paused, searching for the right word. Perfectly. Better than perfectly. I think I might actually be able to make a difference here.
She continued toward her desk, humming that familiar cheerful melody, while I remained rooted in place by the stunning realization that Maya Chen wasn't just talking about making a difference at Sterling Enterprises. She was talking about making a difference in Alexander Sterling himself. And based on what I'd just witnessed, she was already succeeding beyond her wildest dreams. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of activity as word of Maya's presentation spread through the office. There was an energy in the air I'd never experienced at Sterling Enterprises, a sense of possibility, of positive change on the horizon. People who normally kept their heads down and their opinions to themselves were actually talking to each other, discussing Maya's insights and what they might mean for their own departments. Maya herself seemed oblivious to the stir she'd created. She'd thrown herself back into her work with the same focused intensity I'd observed the day before, occasionally glancing up to smile at colleagues who stopped by her desk with questions or congratulations. Each interaction was warm and genuine, gradually thawing the Arctic atmosphere that had defined our workplace for years. Alexander remained in his office for most of the afternoon, but the closed door that had been his signature for 3 years stayed propped open. I caught glimpses of him through the glass walls, and even from a distance, I could see that something fundamental had shifted. His posture was more relaxed, his movements less rigid. He spent long periods staring out his windows, not with his usual calculating assessment of the city below, but with something that looked almost like wonder.
At 4:30, my phone buzzed with an internal call.
Miss Rodriguez, could you ask Miss Chen to step into my office when she has a moment?
Of course, sir. Any particular urgency?
There was a pause. No urgency. Just when convenient for her.
The consideration in his tone was so unprecedented that I had to replay the words in my head to make sure I'd heard correctly. Alexander Sterling asking for someone's convenience rather than demanding immediate compliance was like discovering a unicorn in the break room, so...
I walked over to Maya's desk, where she was deep in concentration, surrounded by spreadsheets and marketing reports that she'd somehow made look fascinating rather than tedious.
Maya, Mr. Sterling would like to see you in his office when you have a moment, or... She looked up with that radiant smile, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Of course. Let me just finish this analysis of the social media correlation patterns. Give me 5 minutes.
Take your time. He said there was no urgency.
Maya's eyebrows rose slightly. No urgency? From Mr. Sterling? Are you sure we're talking about the same person? I laughed despite myself. I had the same reaction. But yes, those were his exact words. 10 minutes later, Maya knocked softly on Alexander's office door before entering. I tried to focus on my own work, but the gravitational pull of their interaction was impossible to ignore. Through the glass walls, I could see them sitting across from each other, Alexander behind his imposing desk, Maya in the chair where so many employees had received criticism, corrections, and terminations. But this conversation looked different. Alexander was leaning forward, his usual defensive posture abandoned in favor of engaged attention. Maya had pulled her chair closer to the desk, and they were both looking at documents spread between them, their heads close enough that their voices would be barely above whispers. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language. Alexander's hands moved as he spoke, animated in a way I'd never seen before. Maya nodded frequently, occasionally interjecting with comments that made Alexander pause and consider, sometimes smiling at whatever insight she'd offered. At one point, Maya laughed, a genuine, delighted sound that seemed to ripple through the office. Alexander's response was equally remarkable. He laughed too, a low chuckle that transformed his face entirely. For that brief moment, he didn't look like the intimidating CEO who'd built an empire through sheer force of will. He looked like a man discovering something he'd forgotten he'd lost. Their meeting stretched on for nearly an hour, far longer than any typical Alexander Sterling consultation. When Maya finally emerged from his office, she was practically glowing with excitement, clutching a folder that seemed to contain the secrets of the universe based on her expression. "Elena," she said as she passed my desk, "do you have a moment?" "Of course. Everything all right?" "More than all right. Alexander just asked me to lead the implementation of the strategy I presented this morning. Not assist with it, lead it. With full authority to coordinate across departments and make operational decisions." I stared at her, struggling to process what she'd just said. "Lead implementation? But you've been here for 2 days." "I know, it's incredible, right? He said the company needs fresh thinking, and that traditional hierarchies sometimes prevent the best ideas from taking root.
He wants me to report directly to him during the implementation phase.
Report directly to Alexander Sterling, the man who'd never had a direct report below VP level in the entire history of the company.
The man who compartmentalized everything and trusted no one with significant autonomy.
Maya, I said carefully, that's an extraordinary level of responsibility for someone so new to the organization as I know, and I don't take it lightly. But Alexander, Mr. Sterling, he has such vision for what this company could become.
He's not just thinking about profit margins and quarterly growth. He's thinking about building something meaningful, something that could genuinely improve people's lives. The passion in her voice was unmistakable, and I realized with growing amazement that Maya Chen had just spent an hour discovering the man behind Alexander Sterling's carefully constructed facade. More remarkably, she seemed to genuinely admire what she'd found there.
He must have a lot of confidence in your abilities,
I said. He does, but it's more than that. He's not what people think he is, Elena. Yes, he's demanding and perfectionist and sometimes intimidating. But underneath all that armor, he's someone who genuinely cares. About the company, about doing things right, about... She paused, a soft smile playing at the corners of her mouth. About making sure good ideas aren't wasted just because they come from unexpected sources. I watched her face as she spoke, noting the subtle changes in her expression. The professional enthusiasm was still there, but it was tempered with something warmer, more personal. Maya Chen was falling under Alexander Sterling's spell, just as surely as he was falling under hers.
When do you start this new role? I asked.
Monday morning. Alexander wants me to spend the weekend reviewing departmental structures and resource allocation so I can hit the ground running. He's given me access to everything: strategic plans, financial projections, personnel files. He said... She paused again, her cheeks flushing slightly. He said he trusts my judgment completely. Trust. Alexander Sterling. Trusting someone completely after knowing them for 2 days was like the sun deciding to rise in the west. It defied everything I thought I knew about the man I'd worked with for 3 years.
That's wonderful. Maya, really, I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
And Elena, I hope we can continue working together closely. Alexander speaks very highly of you. He says you're the backbone of this entire operation. I'd love to learn from your experience here.
Before I could respond, Alexander appeared in the doorway of his office. Miss Chen, I forgot to mention, there's a dinner meeting tomorrow night with the Richardson Group. They're potential partners for the Q4 strategy implementation. Would you be available to attend? Your insights would be valuable for the discussion. A dinner meeting. Alexander Sterling, who conducted all business during business hours and treated social interaction like a necessary evil, was inviting Maya to a dinner meeting.
I'd be honored, Maya replied. What time should I meet you there?
Actually, Alexander said, and I could see him struggling with some internal decision. I could pick you up, if that's convenient. The Richardson Group prefers more traditional approaches to business relationships. Traditional approaches. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. Alexander Sterling was asking Maya on what was essentially a business date, and he was using corporate protocol as cover.
That would be perfect, Maya said, apparently oblivious to the subtext. Should I prepare any specific materials for the meeting?
Just bring yourself, Alexander said, and there was something in his voice, a warmth, an intimacy that made the simple words sound like so much more. Your perspective is what they need to hear.
They exchanged a few more details about timing and dress code, but I was barely listening. I was too busy watching the way they looked at each other, Alexander with something approaching reverence, Maya with a growing awareness that something significant was happening between them. When Maya finally returned to her desk, I caught Alexander still standing in his doorway, watching her with an expression I'd never seen before. Not the calculating assessment he usually applied to people and situations, but something softer, more vulnerable, something that looked suspiciously like longing. The rest of the afternoon flew by in a blur of activity. Maya dove into her new responsibilities with characteristic enthusiasm, making phone calls to department heads and scheduling meetings for the following week. Her energy was infectious, spreading through the office like spring fever after a long winter. Alexander remained visible in his office, but he was clearly struggling to focus on his usual tasks. I watched him attempt to review documents, only to find his attention drifting toward Maya's desk, where she worked with focused intensity. At one point, I caught him simply standing at his window, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he listened to Maya's laughter echoing across the office. At 6:15, Maya began packing up her things, humming that familiar cheerful melody. She gathered her materials with the careful attention of someone who genuinely loved what she did, then stopped by my desk on her way to the elevator. Have a wonderful weekend, Elena. Thank you for all your help this week. I know I still have so much to learn about how things work here. You're fitting in remarkably well, I assured her. I think you're going to do incredible things in your new role. I hope so. This feels like the opportunity of a lifetime, you know? Working with someone like Alexander, Mr. Sterling, someone who's not afraid to take risks on unconventional ideas. It's exactly what I dreamed about when I was studying business strategy. She was almost at the elevator when Alexander emerged from his office, moving with uncharacteristic haste. "Maya," he called out, his voice carrying across the nearly empty office. She turned, surprise flickering across her features. "Yes?" Alexander approached her, and I could see him struggling with whatever he wanted to say. His usual eloquence seemed to have abandoned him, leaving him standing before her with the awkward uncertainty of a teenager asking someone to prom. "I wanted to." "Thank you," he said finally. "For today." For accepting the new responsibilities, for
he gestured helplessly. For bringing something back that I thought I'd lost.
Maya's expression softened, and she took a step closer to him. What did you think you'd lost?
Hope, Alexander said simply, the word hanging between them like a confession. The belief that things could be better, that work could be more than just existing.
They stood there in the fading afternoon light, the city skyline glowing golden behind them through the massive windows. The office was nearly empty now, just the two of them and the security guard making his rounds on lower floors. In that moment, all the corporate hierarchy and professional boundaries seemed to dissolve, leaving just two people discovering something neither had expected to find.
Alexander, Maya said gently, and hearing his first name from her lips seemed to undo something fundamental in his composure. You never lost hope. You just buried it so deep that you forgot where to look for it. But it was always there, waiting. How can you be so sure? Maya smiled, and the simple warmth of it seemed to illuminate the entire office. Because hopeless people don't build companies like this. They don't inspire the kind of loyalty I see in your employees. They don't take chances on strange new ideas from coordinators they barely know. You may have convinced yourself that you're just going through the motions, but everything you do says otherwise. Alexander stared at her, and I could see years of carefully constructed defenses crumbling in real time. The man who'd built an empire through sheer force of will was being undone by simple kindness and honest insight.
Maya, he said, her name barely above a whisper.
Yes? Tomorrow night, the dinner with Richardson Group. It's not just business. The admission hung between them, loaded with implications that neither seemed quite ready to fully acknowledge. Maya's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away from his intense gaze. I know, she said softly. And you're still willing to go? I'm looking forward to it. The elevator chimed, interrupting the moment with its mechanical indifference. Maya stepped toward the doors, then paused and looked back at Alexander. For what it's worth, she said, I think the man behind all that armor is worth getting to know, even if he's forgotten that about himself. The elevator doors closed on her smile, leaving Alexander standing alone in the office corridor, transformed by 30 seconds of honest conversation. I watched him make his way slowly back to his office, moving like someone who'd just discovered he'd been sleepwalking through his own life. As I gathered my own things to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed something remarkable, the first crack in a wall that had been decades in the building. Maya Chen had arrived at Sterling Enterprises 3 days ago as a coordinator-level marketing hire. In that short time, she'd revolutionized our understanding of customer engagement, earned a promotion to senior leadership, and begun the seemingly impossible task of thawing Alexander Sterling's frozen heart. But as I locked up the office and headed for the parking garage, I couldn't help wondering what would happen when the real world intruded on their perfect fairy tale. Corporate romance was complicated under the best circumstances, and these were hardly typical conditions. Maya was brilliant and genuine, but she was also young and idealistic. Alexander was successful and increasingly vulnerable,
But he was also her boss and a man who'd spent years learning to see relationships as potential weaknesses.
Still, as I drove home through the city streets, I found myself hoping that somehow, against all odds and corporate logic, they'd find a way to make it work. Because if two people ever deserved to find happiness together, it was the woman who chose joy in all circumstances, and the man who'd forgotten that joy was even possible.
The weekend passed with uncharacteristic calm, but Monday morning brought an energy to Sterling Enterprises that I'd never experienced before. Maya arrived early, carrying herself with the confidence of someone who'd spent the weekend preparing for the challenge of her new role. But there was something else in her demeanor, a subtle glow that suggested her dinner with Alexander had gone very well indeed. Alexander himself was a revelation. Gone was the rigid control that had defined his every movement for 3 years. He walked through the office with something approaching ease, nodding to employees who seemed stunned by the simple acknowledgement of their existence. When he spoke to department heads about Maya's implementation plan, his voice carried genuine enthusiasm rather than his usual demanding authority. But it was the small moments that told the real story. The way Alexander's eyes followed Maya as she moved through the office, conducting meetings and coordinating between departments. How Maya's face lit up whenever she caught sight of him through his office windows. The coffee cups that appeared on each other's desks without explanation. The extended conversations that took place behind the glass walls of his office, both of them leaning forward with the intensity of people discovering they had far more to talk about than quarterly projections. By Wednesday, the entire office was buzzing with speculation. Relationships between supervisors and subordinates weren't explicitly forbidden at Sterling Enterprises, but they were certainly unprecedented. Alexander Sterling's legendary emotional distance had been company policy for as long as anyone could remember. "Something's different about the boss," Jennifer Walsh confided to me during our usual coffee break. "He actually smiled during yesterday's departmental meeting. Not the scary professional smile, a real one. And he asked about team morale. Actual, genuine concern about whether people were happy in their roles." "Maya's implementation is going well," I said diplomatically. "Everyone seems energized by the new initiatives."
It's more than that, though. He's softer somehow, more human. And Maya, she's like a completely different person when he's around. Have you noticed how she lights up whenever he walks into a room?
I had noticed. It was impossible not to notice the way Maya's professional competence transformed into something more personal whenever Alexander was present. The way her laughter became more musical, her gestures more animated, her smile more radiant. She was falling for him with the wholehearted enthusiasm she brought to everything else in her life. The real test came Thursday afternoon, when the Richardson Group sent their final contracts for review. Maya had been working with their team all week, refining the implementation strategy based on their feedback and concerns. The negotiations had been complex, requiring her to balance Sterling Enterprises' interests with Richardson's more conservative approach to customer engagement. I was in Alexander's office, delivering the signed documents, when Maya knocked on his door. "Come in," Alexander called, his voice automatically warming at the sight of her.
"I have the final numbers from Richardson," she said, entering with a folder clutched in her hands. "Alexander, I think you should see these before we celebrate."
The concern in her voice was evident, and Alexander's expression shifted immediately to alert focus. "What's wrong?"
Maya approached his desk, spreading out the contract terms and financial projections. Richardson agreed to our core strategy, but they're requiring implementation modifications that could reduce our projected impact by nearly 40%. They want to phase in the emotional engagement components over 18 months instead of 6, and they're insisting on approval authority for all customer communication protocols.
Alexander studied the documents, his jaw tightening as he absorbed the implications. They're trying to neutralize everything that makes your strategy revolutionary. Exactly. They like the idea of increased engagement, but they're terrified of anything that feels too personal or emotional. They want the benefits without the innovation.
And if we refuse their modifications? Maya's shoulders slumped slightly. They walk away, and Elena mentioned that Richardson represents almost 30% of our Q4 revenue projections.
Alexander was quiet for a long moment, weighing business pragmatism against the potential Maya had demonstrated. I could see the internal struggle playing out across his features, the safe choice versus the right choice, financial security versus meaningful progress.
Maya, he said finally, in your professional opinion, what happens if we accept their terms?
Short-term success, long-term stagnation. We'll hit our immediate numbers, but we'll lose the opportunity to genuinely transform how we connect with customers. It becomes just another incremental improvement instead of the paradigm shift it could be.
And if we refuse?
We lose a major contract, face significant financial pressure, and risk our ability to implement the strategy with other partners. But we preserve the integrity of the approach for future opportunities.
Alexander nodded slowly, his expression grave. Elena, could you give us a few minutes?
I left them alone with what was clearly a moment of truth for both Maya's strategy and their developing relationship. Through the glass walls, I could see Alexander moving around his desk to sit in the chair beside Maya, their conversation intense and private.
Whatever they discussed took nearly 30 minutes. When I finally saw Maya emerge from his office, her expression was subdued but determined. Alexander followed her to the doorway, and the look they exchanged carried the weight of a decision that would affect far more than just business outcomes. An hour later, Alexander called an emergency meeting with the senior leadership team. Maya sat beside him at the conference table. Her presentation materials spread before her like battle plans.
Richardson Group has requested significant modifications to our Q4 implementation strategy. Alexander began without preamble. Modifications that would essentially eliminate the innovative elements that make Maya's approach valuable.
Victoria Hammond leaned forward, her expression sharp with concern.
What kind of modifications?
Maya walked through the proposed changes with clinical precision, explaining how each requirement would diminish the strategy's effectiveness. The room grew quieter as the implications became clear.
So we're facing a choice, David Morrison summarized.
Accept their terms and preserve our Q4 numbers, or refuse and take a major financial hit for the sake of strategic integrity.
That's correct, Alexander said. And I've made my decision. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Everyone in the room understood that Alexander Sterling built his reputation on making the financially optimal choice, regardless of personal preferences or idealistic considerations.
We're refusing Richardson's terms, Alexander announced. The reaction was immediate,
shocked silence from some, sharp intake of breath from others. Victoria Hammond looked like she'd been physically struck.
Alexander, she said carefully, that decision could cost us millions in revenue.
Yes, it could. But accepting their terms would cost us something more valuable, our ability to genuinely innovate. Maya's strategy isn't just about increasing engagement metrics. It's about fundamentally changing how we build relationships with our customers. Richardson's modifications would turn it into exactly the kind of superficial improvement that our competitors can easily replicate. He looked around the table, meeting each executive's gaze with calm determination. We didn't build Sterling Enterprises by playing it safe. We built it by recognizing opportunities that others missed and having the courage to pursue them. Maya's approach represents exactly that kind of opportunity.
But the financial risk, David began,
is manageable. Alexander cut him off. We have other potential partners, and the strategy's applications extend far beyond Richardson's market segment. More importantly, we have something our competitors don't: genuine innovation backed by rigorous analysis. That combination is worth more than any single contract. And Maya had remained quiet throughout the discussion, but now she spoke up. I want everyone to know that I fully understand the risks this decision represents. If the strategy fails, if we can't find alternative implementation partners, the responsibility is mine. I believe in this approach completely, but I also recognize that belief doesn't guarantee success.
"The responsibility is mine," Alexander corrected firmly. "This is my decision, based on my assessment of our long-term strategic interests. Maya provided the analysis and recommendations. I chose how to act on them."
The meeting continued for another hour, with the team working through contingency plans and alternative approaches. But the fundamental decision had been made. Sterling Enterprises would bet its Q4 projections on Maya's innovative strategy, rather than accept a watered-down version that would generate immediate revenue. As the executives filed out, I heard Victoria Hammond mutter to David Morrison, "I hope he knows what he's doing. This isn't like Alexander at all, She was right. The old Alexander Sterling would have taken Richardson's deal without hesitation, viewing emotional attachment to any particular strategy as a dangerous weakness. But the man sitting at the conference table beside Maya Chen was someone different, someone willing to risk financial security for the sake of meaningful progress. "Are you okay?" Maya asked Alexander as they gathered their materials. "I'm terrified," he admitted with a smile that somehow made the confession seem like victory. "But for the first time in years, I'm terrified about something that actually matters."
Maya's response was to reach across the table and squeeze his hand, a simple gesture that somehow managed to encapsulate everything they'd discovered about each other over the past week.
"Whatever happens," she said, "we'll face it together."
Alexander stared down at their joined hands, and I could see him struggling with emotions he'd spent decades learning to suppress. When he looked up at Maya, his expression held a vulnerability that was both heartbreaking and hopeful.
"Together,"
he repeated, as if testing the word. "I'd like that very much." They sat there for a moment in the empty conference room, hands clasped across the table. Two people who'd found something worth risking everything for. But as I watched them, I couldn't shake the growing sense that their biggest challenges were still ahead.
Corporate romance was complicated enough without adding the pressure of a multi-million-dollar strategic gamble. Still, looking at them together, Maya's unwavering optimism and Alexander's newfound willingness to hope, I found myself believing that maybe, just maybe, they had what it would take to overcome whatever obstacles lay ahead.
The real test would come sooner than any of us expected.
Friday afternoon brought news that would challenge everything Maya and Alexander had built together. I was organizing Alexander's calendar for the following week when Victoria Hammond burst into the outer office, her face flushed with urgent excitement.
Elena, is Alexander available? We just received a call from Meridian Industries. They want to discuss a partnership opportunity that could be exactly what we need to replace the Richardson revenue.
Meridian Industries. Even I recognized the name. They were one of the largest consumer goods companies in the country, with a customer base that dwarfed Richardson Group by several orders of magnitude. A partnership with Meridian could transform Sterling Enterprises from a successful regional company into a national powerhouse.
He's in a meeting with Maya, I said, but I'll let him know you're here.
Actually, Elena. Victoria's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. This conversation might be better with just the senior leadership team. The Meridian opportunity could be sensitive.
Something in her tone set off alarm bells in my head. Sensitive how? Victoria glanced toward Alexander's office, where I could see him and Maya reviewing implementation timelines through the glass walls. Meridian has very specific requirements for their business partners. Traditional corporate structure, conventional management approaches, proven track records with established strategies. They're not particularly progressive in their views on innovation or non-traditional business relationships.
The implication hit me like a physical blow. Meridian Industries wouldn't just be evaluating Sterling Enterprises' financial performance or strategic capabilities.
They'd be scrutinizing every aspect of the company's operations, including the increasingly obvious relationship between Alexander and Maya.
I'll let Mr. Sterling know you're here, I said carefully. Victoria nodded, but her expression remained troubled. Elena, I hope you understand that this opportunity could save our Q4 projections.
After the Richardson decision, we need a win. A big one.
I understood perfectly. And as I watched Victoria settle into the waiting area, I also understood that Maya and Alexander were about to face their first real test, not just as business partners, but as two people whose personal connection was becoming impossible to hide. I knocked softly on Alexander's office door before entering. Excuse me, but Victoria is here. She says Meridian Industries has called about a potential partnership.
The effect was immediate. Alexander straightened in his chair, his expression shifting to sharp focus. Meridian, what kind of partnership?
She didn't provide details, but she mentioned it could address our Q4 revenue concerns. Maya looked between us, clearly sensing the significance of the name. Should I? No, Alexander said quickly. Stay. If this involves implementation strategy, your input will be essential. He called Victoria into his office, and the next hour provided a masterclass in corporate opportunity and personal conflict. Victoria's presentation was flawless. Meridian Industries was looking for a strategic partner to help them implement a comprehensive customer engagement overhaul across their entire product line. The scope was massive,
the timeline aggressive, and the financial rewards potentially transformative.
They want to meet with our senior leadership team on Monday, Victoria explained. If the initial discussions go well, they're prepared to offer a 3-year exclusive partnership worth approximately 8 times our projected Richardson revenue.
Maya's eyes widened at the numbers, but Alexander's expression remained carefully neutral. What are their specific requirements?
Standard due diligence on our financial stability, operational capacity, and strategic capabilities. They'll want to review our recent performance, management structure, and implementation methodologies. Victoria paused, her gaze flickering toward Maya. They're also very thorough in their assessment of corporate culture and professional relationships. The warning was subtle but unmistakable. Meridian Industries would be evaluating every aspect of Sterling Enterprises, including the developing relationship between its CEO and his newest senior team member. Corporate culture, Alexander repeated slowly. Are there specific areas of concern? Meridian has a reputation for preferring traditional business environments, clear hierarchies, established protocols, minimal potential for conflicts of interest. Victoria's discomfort with the conversation was evident, but her determination to secure the partnership overrode her personal reservations. They've walked away from lucrative deals in the past due to concerns about unprofessional relationships between supervisors and subordinates. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya's face had gone pale, and Alexander's jaw was set in a hard line that I recognized as his default response to impossible situations.
I see, Alexander said finally. And their timeline for evaluation?
Initial meetings Monday, with a final decision by Wednesday. If they move forward, they want to begin implementation immediately. Maya found her voice, though it carried a tremor that betrayed her emotional state. The implementation strategy we developed for Richardson, would it be applicable to Meridian's scope? With modifications for scale, absolutely. In fact, your approach to emotional engagement could be exactly what Meridian needs to differentiate their customer experience. Victoria's enthusiasm was genuine, but it was tinged with the complexity of their situation. Maya, your work this week has been extraordinary. The board is incredibly impressed with your results. But, Maya prompted, sensing the unspoken reservation. Victoria looked between Maya and Alexander, clearly struggling with how to articulate the impossible choice they were facing. But Meridian's partnership could secure our company's future for years to come. We can't afford to let personal considerations jeopardize that opportunity. The words hung in the air like an ultimatum. Choose the partnership or choose each other, but not both. Alexander stood and walked to his window, his hands clasped behind his back in the posture I'd come to recognize as his thinking stance. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Victoria, please confirm the Monday meeting and send me all available information about Meridian's evaluation criteria. Maya and I will need the weekend to review the strategic implications and prepare our presentation. Of course. And Alexander? Victoria's voice carried a note of gentle urgency. Whatever decisions need to be made, they should be made soon. Meridian doesn't typically offer second chances. After Victoria left, Alexander and Maya sat in silence for several minutes. The weight of their impossible situation seemed to fill the office, making even breathing feel difficult. 8 times the Richardson revenue.
Maya said finally, her voice barely above a whisper.
Yes.
And my strategy would be perfect for their needs.
Yes, see.
But they won't work with us if they think we're...
She gestured helplessly between them, unable to finish the sentence. Alexander turned from the window to face her, and the anguish in his expression was devastating to witness. Maya, I want you to know that whatever happens with Meridian, what's developed between us this week has been the most important thing that's happened to me in years. Maybe ever.
Tears began to gather in Maya's eyes, but she blinked them back with fierce determination. Alexander, I feel the same way. But I also know how much this company means to you, how much you've sacrificed to build it. I can't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for.
And I can't ask you to sacrifice your career for a relationship that's barely begun. Oh.
They stared at each other across the office. Two people discovering that sometimes the cruelest choice is between two things you desperately want.
The late afternoon sun streaming through the windows cast long shadows across the floor, and in that golden light, they looked like figures in a tragic painting, beautiful and doomed and utterly heartbreaking.
What do we do? Maya asked, her voice breaking slightly on the words.
Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with decisions that would affect not just their personal futures, but the entire company's survival. We prepare for Monday's meeting, he said finally. We give Meridian the best presentation of our strategic capabilities that we possibly can. And then... He paused, struggling with words that clearly tasted like ash in his mouth. Then we make whatever choices we have to make.
Maya nodded, but I could see her heart breaking in real time. Professional distance. Starting Monday.
Professional distance, Alexander agreed, and the words seemed to physically pain him. They spent the rest of the afternoon working together on the Meridian presentation, but the easy collaboration and natural warmth that had defined their relationship all week was replaced by careful politeness and meaningful silences. They were already beginning the process of stepping away from each other, building walls that would keep them safe from accusations of impropriety. As closing time approached, Maya gathered her materials with mechanical efficiency. The humming that had become her trademark was conspicuously absent, replaced by a subdued quiet that felt wrong in every possible way.
Have a good weekend, she said to Alexander as she prepared to leave, her voice professionally cordial.
You as well, he replied, but his eyes followed her every movement with desperate intensity, as if he were trying to memorize everything about her before she disappeared from his life. I watched Maya walk to the elevator, her usual graceful confidence replaced by the careful movements of someone trying not to fall apart in public. When the elevator doors closed behind her, Alexander emerged from his office and stood in the corridor, staring at the spot where she'd vanished.
She's remarkable, isn't she? He said quietly, not really asking a question.
Yes, sir. She is. The company needs this partnership. Elena. After the Richardson decision, we can't afford to turn down an opportunity like Meridian.
I understand, sir. But I've never... He stopped, seeming to struggle with words he'd never had to say before.
I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about her. And now I have to choose between the company I've spent my life building and the person who's given that life meaning again.
The raw honesty in his voice was devastating. I'd worked with Alexander Sterling for 3 years, watching him navigate impossible business decisions with cold calculation and perfect control. But this wasn't a business decision. This was about the heart he'd spent decades learning to ignore, finally demanding to be heard.
Perhaps, I said carefully, there's a way to have both. The partnership and the relationship.
Alexander looked at me with something that might have been hope. How? I don't know yet, but Maya is one of the most creative problem solvers I've ever met, and you're the most determined person I know. If anyone can find a solution, it's the two of you. Alexander nodded, but his expression remained troubled. Thank you, Elena, for everything. This week has been... He gestured helplessly. I don't know what I would have done without your support. As I locked up the office and headed home, I couldn't shake the feeling that Monday's meeting with Meridian Industries would determine far more than Sterling Enterprises' financial future. It would determine whether two people who'd found something extraordinary together would be able to keep it, or whether the corporate world's demands would force them to sacrifice their happiness for the sake of business success. The irony wasn't lost on me that Maya, who'd spent her first week teaching Alexander to choose joy over fear, was now facing a situation that might force them both to choose fear over joy. But as I drove through the city streets, watching the weekend begin for thousands of people who would never face such an impossible choice, I found myself hoping that somehow, against all odds and corporate expectations, Maya and Alexander would find a way to prove that love and business success weren't mutually exclusive. After all, if anyone deserved a happy ending, it was the woman who brought sunshine to the Arctic tundra and the man who was finally learning to thaw. The question was whether Monday would bring the beginning of their greatest triumph or the end of their perfect beginning. Monday morning arrived with all the inevitability of a natural disaster. I reached the office early, hoping to complete some administrative tasks before the storm hit. But I wasn't the only one with that idea. Alexander's car was already in his reserved parking space, and through the lobby windows, I could see lights burning on the executive floor. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to a funeral. When the doors opened, I was greeted by an atmosphere so thick with tension that it seemed to have physical weight. The usual morning energy of Sterling Enterprises was completely absent, replaced by the hushed whispers of employees who sensed that something significant was about to happen. Alexander was in his office, surrounded by presentation materials and strategic documents that he appeared to be reviewing for the 100th time. His usual immaculate appearance was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up, his hair showing evidence of anxious finger-combing. He looked like a man preparing for battle against impossible odds. Maya's desk was empty, her computer dark, her personal items, the succulent, the family photo, the yellow coffee mug, arranged with the precision of someone who might not be returning to claim them. At 7:45, the elevator chimed, and Maya appeared. Gone was the confident, radiant woman who'd transformed Sterling Enterprises over the past week. In her place stood someone who looked professionally competent but emotionally distant, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her dress a conservative navy that made her look older and more formal.
her smile replaced by polite reserve.
"Good morning, Elena," she said as she passed my desk, her voice carefully neutral.
Good morning, Maya. How are you feeling about today?
"Prepared," she replied, but the single word carried the weight of everything she wasn't saying.
She settled at her desk and immediately began reviewing her presentation materials, her movements efficient but mechanical. The woman who'd hummed cheerful melodies while working had been replaced by someone going through professional motions without joy or spontaneity.
Alexander emerged from his office exactly at 8 o'clock, his own transformation complete. The man who'd discovered laughter and warmth over the past week was gone, replaced by the intimidating CEO who'd ruled Sterling Enterprises through force of will and emotional distance. His greeting to Maya was formally polite, their interaction a masterclass in professional boundaries.
"Miss Chen, are you ready for this morning's presentation?"
Yes, Mr. Sterling. I've prepared comprehensive materials covering all aspects of the implementation strategy.
Excellent. The Meridian team will be arriving at 9:30. Victoria will handle introductions, and we'll proceed directly to the conference room.
"Understood."
They stood there for a moment, separated by less than 10 feet, but somehow farther apart than they'd been before Maya had ever entered his life. The easy warmth and natural connection that had defined their relationship was buried under layers of corporate propriety, and watching them interact with such careful distance was like witnessing a slow-motion tragedy.
"Is there anything else you need to review before the meeting?" Alexander asked, his voice professionally cordial.
No, I believe we've covered all the essential points. The strategy documentation is thorough, and the financial projections account for various implementation scenarios. Good. Then I'll see you in conference room B at 9:30.
Yes, sir.
Alexander returned to his office, and Maya returned to her desk, and both of them began the final preparations for a meeting that would determine everything. But despite their professional competence and careful preparation, I could see the cost of their emotional restraint in the set of Maya's shoulders, in the tension around Alexander's eyes, in the way they both moved like people trying not to cause themselves additional pain. At 9:15, the Meridian Industries team arrived, 4 executives in perfectly tailored suits who moved through our office with the assessing gazes of people accustomed to evaluating and acquiring other companies. Their leader was Margaret Caldwell, a woman in her 50s whose reputation for thorough due diligence was legendary in corporate circles. Victoria handled the introductions with diplomatic smoothness, but I could see her nervousness in the way she kept glancing toward Alexander and Maya, who maintained perfect professional distance despite working as a team. "Ms. Caldwell, I'd like you to meet Alexander Sterling, our CEO, and Maya Chen, who developed the customer engagement strategy we'll be presenting today." Margaret Caldwell's shrewd eyes assessed both of them, lingering slightly longer on Maya than strictly necessary. "Miss Chen, I understand you're relatively new to Sterling Enterprises, but have already made significant contributions to strategic development." "Yes, ma'am. I've been with the company for 1 week, but I've found the collaborative environment here to be exceptionally conducive to innovation." 1 week. Margaret's eyebrow rose slightly. "And you're already leading strategic initiatives of this magnitude?" "Ms. Chen has demonstrated exceptional analytical capabilities and strategic insight," Alexander interjected smoothly.
Her approach to customer engagement represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking that drives sustainable competitive advantage. The presentation that followed was flawless from a technical standpoint. Maya and Alexander worked together with seamless coordination, their professional competence evident in every slide and statistical analysis. Maya's strategy was presented with mathematical precision and compelling business logic, while Alexander provided the strategic context and implementation framework that demonstrated Sterling Enterprises' capacity to execute at scale. But despite their professional excellence, I could see Margaret Caldwell studying their interaction with the analytical focus of someone looking for cracks in a perfect facade. Her questions were sharp and probing, designed to test not just their strategic thinking, but their working relationship.
Ms. Chen, how do you respond to concerns that emotional engagement strategies might be too subjective for large-scale implementation?
Excellent question. While the underlying psychology is inherently subjective, our implementation methodology relies on quantifiable behavioral metrics and statistically validated correlation patterns. We're not asking customers to feel a certain way. We're identifying how they already feel and optimizing our interactions accordingly. And Mr. Sterling, you're confident in Ms. Chen's ability to manage implementation across multiple product lines and geographic regions?
Completely confident. Ms.
Chen's analytical rigor, combined with her intuitive understanding of consumer psychology, makes her uniquely qualified for this challenge.
The questions continued for over an hour, each one designed to probe deeper into their professional relationship and strategic thinking. Maya and Alexander answered with perfect coordination, their responses complementing each other seamlessly while maintaining absolute professional boundaries. Finally, Margaret Caldwell closed her portfolio and leaned back in her chair. This has been very informative. The strategy itself is impressive, innovative while remaining grounded in solid analytical foundation. The implementation framework is comprehensive and well considered. Victoria practically held her breath, waiting for the crucial but that would determine Sterling Enterprises' future. I do have some concerns about organizational dynamics, Margaret continued, her gaze moving between Alexander and Maya. Implementing a strategy of this scope requires absolute trust and clear communication between leadership levels. Any personal complications or conflicts of interest could jeopardize the entire partnership. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander's expression remained perfectly controlled, but I could see his hands tighten almost imperceptibly on his presentation materials. I can assure you, he said carefully, that Sterling Enterprises maintains the highest standards of professional conduct. Our organizational structure provides clear accountability and established protocols for all strategic initiatives. So, I'm sure it does, Margaret replied, but her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Meridian Industries has very specific requirements for our business partnerships. We've found that personal relationships between supervisors and subordinates, regardless of their nature, can create complications that ultimately impact business performance. Maya spoke for the first time in several minutes, her voice steady despite the obvious implications of Margaret's statement. Ms. Caldwell, I want to assure you that my professional judgment and strategic recommendations are based entirely on analytical data and business objectives. Any implementation decisions I make will be driven by results-oriented considerations. I appreciate that assurance, Ms. Chen. But Meridian's due diligence process is quite thorough. We'll need to conduct additional interviews with your staff and review your internal communications to ensure that our partnership won't be compromised by organizational complications. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Meridian Industries would be investigating every aspect of Maya and Alexander's relationship, looking for evidence of impropriety or conflicts of interest that could jeopardize the partnership.
The meeting concluded with polite handshakes and promises of follow-up communication within 48 hours. But as the Meridian team filed out of the conference room, the weight of their unspoken ultimatum hung heavy in the air.
Victoria, Alexander, and Maya remained seated around the conference table, none of them willing to be the first to acknowledge what had just happened. "Well," Victoria said finally, "I think that went as well as could be expected under the circumstances."
"Under the circumstances," Alexander repeated, his voice carefully neutral.
Maya gathered her presentation materials with mechanical precision, her face pale but composed. "If you'll excuse me, I should return to my regular duties while we await Meridian's decision." She left the conference room without meeting Alexander's eyes, her professional distance now feeling less like strategy and more like survival. Alexander watched her go with an expression of barely controlled anguish, but made no move to follow. "Alexander," Victoria said gently, "I know this is difficult, but the company's future is more important than my personal feelings," Alexander finished. "Yes, I understand. I've always understood." "That's not what I was going to say." Alexander looked at her with surprise. "No?" Victoria sighed, her own professional mask slipping slightly. "I was going to say that sometimes the most important business decisions aren't really about business at all. They're about what kind of people we want to be and what kind of company we want to build." "And what kind of company do you think we should build?" "One where extraordinary people like Maya Chen want to stay and grow and contribute their best work. Even if that means taking risks that more conservative companies wouldn't take." Alexander stared at Victoria, clearly not expecting such personal insight from someone he'd always considered purely business-focused. "Are you suggesting we should risk the Meridian partnership for the sake of a relationship that's barely a week old?" "I'm suggesting that maybe the relationship isn't what's really at stake here. Maybe what's at stake is whether Sterling Enterprises becomes the kind of place where innovation and genuine human connection can coexist, or whether we sacrifice everything meaningful for the sake of financial security." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his gaze focused on the conference table where Maya's presentation materials had outlined a strategy that could transform both their company and their industry. "Victoria, if we lose Meridian, the financial impact could be devastating." "Yes, it could. But if we lose Maya, really lose her, not just her strategy, but her perspective and her energy and everything she brings to this place, the impact could be even worse. Just in ways that are harder to quantify." Victoria left Alexander alone in the conference room, and through the glass walls, I could see him struggling with a decision that would define not just his company's future, but his own. On one side lay financial security and corporate respectability, everything he'd spent his career building and protecting. On the other side lay something far less certain, but infinitely more valuable: the possibility of love and genuine human connection in a world that had taught him both were luxuries he couldn't afford. The rest of the day passed in a haze of careful professionalism and meaningful silences. Maya threw herself into routine tasks,
with the focused intensity of someone trying to avoid thinking about bigger questions. Alexander remained in his office, visible through the glass walls but emotionally unreachable, working through strategic documents with grim determination.
As closing time approached, I found myself hoping that somehow, against all corporate logic and financial pressure, they would find a way to choose each other. Because watching two people deny their feelings for the sake of business success was like watching someone choose to remain colorblind in a world full of rainbows. But as Maya gathered her things and headed for the elevator without so much as glancing toward Alexander's office, I couldn't help wondering if some choices, once made, could never be unmade. The phone call came at 11:47 a.m. on Tuesday, exactly 27 hours after the Meridian presentation had ended. I was organizing Alexander's schedule when Victoria burst into the outer office, her face flushed with excitement and something that looked suspiciously like relief.
"Elena, is Alexander available? Margaret Caldwell is on line 1 with Meridian's decision."
Through his office windows, I could see Alexander ending another call, his expression tense with the strain of waiting for news that would determine everything. Maya was at her desk, ostensibly reviewing marketing reports, but I could tell from her rigid posture that she was equally focused on the phone call that would decide their fate.
Alexander picked up the call on the first ring, his voice carefully controlled as he activated the speakerphone so Victoria could participate in the conversation.
"Ms. Caldwell, thank you for getting back to us so quickly."
"Mr. Sterling, I'll get straight to the point. Meridian Industries is prepared to move forward with the partnership, contingent on several specific conditions."
The relief in the room was palpable, but Margaret's emphasis on conditions kept the celebration in check.
"We're listening," Alexander said, though.
First, we want Ms. Chen to lead the implementation personally, but she'll need to relocate to our Chicago office for the duration of the project.
Our experience has shown that this level of strategic initiative requires direct oversight and daily collaboration with our internal teams.
I watched the color drain from Alexander's face as the implications hit him. Maya's strategy was being accepted, her professional worth fully recognized, but the condition would effectively remove her from Sterling Enterprises and from his life.
The project timeline, Margaret continued, is 18 months minimum, with potential extension to 3 years depending on results. Ms. Chen would be compensated at senior consultant level, approximately triple her current salary, and we'd provide full relocation assistance and housing allowances.
Victoria was practically vibrating with excitement at the financial terms, but Alexander's expression had become unreadable.
Second, Margaret continued, we'll need to restructure the reporting relationships for this project. Ms. Chen would report directly to our Vice President of Strategic Development rather than maintaining her current supervisory connections. This ensures clear accountability and eliminates any potential conflicts of interest.
The message was crystal clear. Meridian would accept Maya's brilliant strategy and pay handsomely for her expertise, but only if she was completely removed from Alexander's sphere of influence. They'd identified the developing relationship and decided to solve the problem by making it impossible to continue.
Those are significant conditions, Alexander said carefully.
They're non-negotiable conditions, Margaret clarified. Meridian Industries requires absolute confidence in our partner's organizational integrity. This arrangement provides the best outcome for all parties. Ms. Chen advances her career dramatically, Sterling Enterprises benefits from our partnership revenue, and Meridian gets the strategic innovation we need. And the timeline for Ms. Chen's relocation?
We'd need her in Chicago by Monday. The project launch can't be delayed, and our teams are already preparing for implementation.
Monday, 5 days away. Maya would have to choose between the opportunity of a lifetime and whatever was developing between her and Alexander, with barely enough time to process the magnitude of the decision. Ms. Caldwell, Alexander said, could we have some time to discuss this internally before providing our final response?
Of course. We'll need confirmation by Thursday afternoon. After that, we'll need to pursue alternative implementation strategies.
The call ended, leaving Alexander and Victoria alone with a decision that nobody had wanted to face. Through the glass walls, I could see Maya still at her desk, her attention apparently focused on her computer screen. But the tension in her shoulders revealed that she'd heard every word of the conversation. Victoria was the first to break the silence. Alexander, this is everything we hoped for. The financial terms are extraordinary. Maya's career advancement is remarkable, and the partnership gives us exactly the security we need after the Richardson situation.
Yes,
Alexander agreed quietly. It's perfect. But? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on Maya's distant figure. But it feels like we're being offered everything we thought we wanted, at the cost of the one thing we didn't know we needed.
Alexander?
I know the logical choice, the responsible choice, the choice that any competent CEO would make without hesitation.
He stood and walked to his window, hands clasped behind his back in the familiar posture that usually preceded his most difficult decisions. But this time, the calculations seemed to be tearing him apart rather than providing clarity.
Victoria, can I ask you something?
Of course.
When you started working here, what did you think Sterling Enterprises could become?
Victoria looked surprised by the question. I thought it could become a major player in strategic consulting. Successful, profitable, respected in the industry.
And have we achieved that?
Yes, absolutely. Beyond what I imagined when I started.
Ooh.
Alexander nodded, but his expression remained troubled. So why doesn't it feel like enough anymore?
Victoria studied his face, clearly seeing something that went beyond professional considerations. Because success without meaning is just elaborate busy work, and meaning requires connection to purpose, to values, to other people who share your vision. Oh.
Connection, Alexander repeated. Yes, that's what's been missing.
He was quiet for several more minutes, and I could see him struggling with competing loyalties to the company he'd built, to the employees who depended on him, to the financial obligations that responsible leadership demanded, and to something newer and more fragile that had changed everything about how he saw his life and work. Finally, he turned back to Victoria. I need to talk to Maya. Before any decisions are made, she deserves to know exactly what she's being offered and what it would mean, Of course. Should I ask her to come in? No. This conversation needs to happen away from the office.
away from corporate pressure and professional expectations. She needs to be able to consider this opportunity without worrying about how her decision might affect anyone else.
Victoria nodded, understanding the wisdom of removing Maya from an environment where she might feel obligated to consider Sterling Enterprises' interests over her own. Where will you meet? I'll ask her. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere she can speak freely about what she really wants, As Victoria left to return to her own office, Alexander remained at his window for several more minutes, clearly gathering courage for a conversation that would determine the course of both their lives. When he finally moved toward his door, his stride carried the determined purpose of someone who'd made a fundamental decision about what mattered most. I watched him approach Maya's desk, his usual commanding presence softened by something that looked almost like vulnerability. Maya looked up as he approached, her professional mask firmly in place, but I could see the slight tremor in her hands as she set down her pen. "Maya," he said quietly, "could we talk? Not here. Somewhere private." Maya's eyes searched his face, reading the gravity of his expression. "Of course. Where would you like to go?" "There's a small coffee shop 3 blocks from here. Quiet, neutral. Would that work?" "Yes. Should I bring anything? Files? Reports?" Alexander's smile was soft and sad. "Just yourself. This isn't about business." They left the office together, and I found myself holding my breath as I watched them disappear into the elevator. Whatever happened in the next hour would determine not just their personal future, but the future of Sterling Enterprises itself. They were gone for nearly 2 hours. When they returned, they moved through the office like ghosts of their former selves, Maya to her desk, Alexander to his office, both maintaining the professional distance that had become their survival mechanism. But there was something different in their demeanor now, a finality that suggested decisions had been made and... At 4:30, Alexander called an emergency meeting with the senior leadership team. Maya was notably absent from the invitation list. I positioned myself outside the conference room as the executives filed in, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. Through the glass walls, I could see Alexander standing at the head of the table, his posture straight and his expression grave.
"I'll get straight to the point," he began without preamble. "Meridian Industries has offered us the partnership, contingent on Maya Chen relocating to Chicago to lead implementation from their offices. The financial terms are exceptional. The strategic opportunity is exactly what we need, and Maya's career advancement would be remarkable." Victoria leaned forward. "That's wonderful news. When do we confirm acceptance?" "We don't..." The silence that followed was absolute. Every person in the room stared at Alexander as if he'd just announced his intention to burn the building down. "I'm sorry," David Morrison said carefully. "Did you just say we're refusing the Meridian partnership?"
I'm saying we're refusing their conditions. Maya Chen is not leaving Sterling Enterprises. We'll find another way to address our Q4 projections.
Victoria's voice was sharp with disbelief. "Alexander, this partnership could be worth tens of millions of dollars. You're willing to sacrifice that for one employee?" "I'm willing to sacrifice that for the principle that this company should be a place where extraordinary people want to stay and build their careers, where innovation is valued more than convention, and where we don't abandon our best assets because other companies find them inconvenient."
But the financial impact will be significant, Alexander acknowledged, but not catastrophic. We'll adjust our projections, explore alternative partnerships, and continue building the kind of company that attracts people like Maya in the first place.
Jennifer Walsh spoke up hesitantly. Alexander, has Maya agreed to this? Turning down an opportunity like Meridian could severely limit her career prospects, so...
Alexander's expression softened slightly. Maya will make her own decision about what's best for her career, but she'll make it knowing that Sterling Enterprises values her contributions enough to fight for them. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Alexander fielding challenges and concerns from his senior team. But his resolve never wavered. He'd made his choice, and all the financial projections and strategic arguments in the world weren't going to change his mind. When the meeting finally ended, I watched the executives file out with expressions of confusion and concern. Victoria was the last to leave, pausing in the doorway to look back at Alexander.
"I hope you know what you're doing," she said quietly.
"So do I," Alexander replied. "But I know that some decisions are too important to make based on fear." After the conference room emptied, Alexander remained seated at the table, staring at his hands as if trying to understand how he'd become someone capable of putting personal values ahead of financial security. Through the glass walls, I could see Maya at her desk, apparently focused on her work, but clearly aware of the meeting that had just concluded. At 5:15, Alexander finally emerged from the conference room and walked directly to Maya's desk. The office was nearly empty now, just a skeleton crew of dedicated workaholics and the cleaning staff beginning their evening rounds. "Maya," he said softly, "could we finish our conversation?" She looked up at him with eyes that held a mixture of hope and heartbreak. "Did you really just turn down the Meridian partnership?" "I turned down their conditions. The partnership was contingent on losing you, and that's not a trade I'm willing to make." "Alexander." Maya's voice broke slightly on his name. "That partnership could have secured your company's future. You can't sacrifice that for me." "I'm not sacrificing it for you," he said gently. "I'm sacrificing it for us, for the possibility of building something that's about more than just profit margins and market share." Maya stood slowly, her hands trembling as she faced him. "And what if there is no us? What if we try this and it doesn't work? What if mixing personal and professional relationships destroys everything we've both worked for?" Alexander moved closer, close enough that his voice would be for her alone. "Then we'll face that together too. But Maya, I've spent my entire career making the safe choice, the logical choice, the choice that protected my assets and minimized my risks. And it gave me everything I thought I wanted: success, respect, financial security. But it never gave me joy. It never gave me hope. It never gave me someone to share it with." Tears were streaming down Maya's face now, but she made no move to wipe them away. "I can't be responsible for you losing everything you've built." "You're not responsible for my choices, but you are responsible for showing me that there are other ways to measure success. That connection and meaning and genuine human warmth are worth more than any partnership contract." They stood there in the empty office, surrounded by the detritus of corporate life, computers humming quietly, phones blinking with unanswered messages.
the city lights beginning to twinkle outside the massive windows. But in that moment, all of it faded into background noise compared to the electricity crackling between them.
Maya,
Alexander said, reaching out to gently cup her face in his hands. I'm falling in love with you. Not with your analytical skills or your strategic insights or your professional competence, though all of those are remarkable. I'm falling in love with your ability to find joy in unexpected places, with your kindness to people who don't deserve it, with your belief that work should be about more than just existing. Maya's breath caught, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm already in love with you, with your passion for excellence, with your hidden vulnerability, with the way you've started to remember that business success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. Alexander leaned down, and Maya rose on her tiptoes, and their first kiss was everything a first kiss should be, tentative and desperate and full of promise and terror all at once. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, as if they'd just run a marathon or jumped off a cliff.
So what happens now? Maya asked, her forehead resting against his.
Now we figure it out together. We build policies that address corporate relationships professionally and ethically. We prove that innovation and personal connection can coexist. We show companies like Meridian that there are more important things than their narrow definitions of propriety.
and if we fail?
Alexander smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd finally found something worth risking everything for. Then we fail spectacularly, and we do it knowing that we chose authenticity over safety, love over fear, and meaning over profit. Maya laughed through her tears, the musical sound that had been missing from Sterling Enterprises for days. When you put it like that, how can we possibly lose?
We can't, Alexander said, pulling her closer. Because we'll have each other.
They held each other in the empty office, two people who'd found something extraordinary in the most unlikely place. Through the windows, the city sparkled with millions of lights, each one representing someone trying to find their own version of happiness and meaning. But for Maya Chen and Alexander Sterling, the search was over. They'd found each other, and they'd chosen each other, despite every logical argument against it. And as I gathered my things to leave, watching them together in their perfect bubble of new love and impossible hope, I couldn't help but smile. Because sometimes, just sometimes, fairy tales do come true, even in corporate boardrooms and executive suites where hearts are supposed to stay frozen and dreams are supposed to stay buried. 3 months later, Maya's revised strategy, implemented with a new partner who valued innovation over convention, increased Sterling Enterprises' quarterly revenue by 45%. The company culture transformation that followed her promotion to Chief Strategy Officer attracted the best talent in the industry, people drawn by stories of a workplace where brilliance was rewarded and genuine human connection was not just tolerated, but celebrated. Alexander and Maya's relationship, conducted with complete transparency and proper HR protocols, became a model for how personal and professional growth could enhance rather than compromise business success. They proved that love and leadership weren't mutually exclusive, that vulnerability could be a strength, and that the best business decisions were often made by hearts brave enough to choose hope over fear. But perhaps most importantly, they proved that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do in a world obsessed with profit margins and market share is to remember that business is ultimately about people, and that people, at their core, need connection, meaning, and the courage to believe that tomorrow can be better than today. Because in the end, the greatest strategic advantage any company can have is not just smart people, but smart people who love what they do and have someone to share that passion with. And if that's not worth risking everything for, then perhaps we've forgotten what everything really means.
The elevator doors closed on their intertwined hands and synchronized laughter, carrying them toward a future that would be anything but safe, anything but predictable, and absolutely everything worth fighting for.